What About Bob? Plays like a vacation comedy that slowly turns into a siege. Bill Murray shows up smiling and impossible to shake. Richard Dreyfuss arrives with perfect control and spends the entire film watching it slip away inch by inch. Baby steps that never stop. I'm sailing. Turning into a nightmare. Boundaries crossed with a grin. Family dinners hijacked. A lakeside getaway collapsing into one long polite panic attack while everyone around keeps laughing. But underneath those laughs, the movie kept tightening the screw. It was originally built to lean hard into drama, closer to stress than slapstick. Then the real tension showed up for free when Murray and Dreyfuss started clashing so hard it charged the entire movie. And through all of it, Frank Oz carried the quiet fear that the film simply wasn't going to work. These are 11 weird facts about What About Bob? The comedy where one man keeps trying to get better and another man keeps getting destroyed by it. The strange thing about What About Bob is that it did not start as a comedy at all. In the mid-1980s, producer Laura Ziskin and screenwriter Alvin Sargent came across Judith Rosner's novel August, a quieter story built around one simple question: what happens to patients when their therapist disappears on vacation? The book was not funny, but the premise stayed with them because buried inside it was something sharper. What if one patient did not let go? That was the turn. A man so needy and anxious that the second his psychiatrist leaves town, he follows him. Not to hurt him, just because in his own mind that is the only sane thing left to do. That gave the story its engine. Ziskin and Sargent shaped the idea into a treatment, then handed it to Tom Schulman in 1987, and that is where the movie truly changed. Schulman understood that if Bob felt like just another irritating movie pest, the whole thing would collapse. So he flipped the dynamic. Instead of making Bob someone the audience resents, he made him someone honestly trying to get better, who simply misunderstands everything. Every desperate move Dr. Marvin makes to push Bob away, Bob hears as real therapeutic advice, walking off convinced he just had a breakthrough. Once that dynamic clicks, Marvin has to change too. He cannot just be a victim. He has to be rigid, proud, and so full of himself that he believes completely in his own control until Bob starts exposing every crack in it. Bob gets better, Marvin gets worse. That reversal gives the movie its shape. Schulman even looked to Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons for the rhythm, one figure endlessly arriving, the other endlessly trying to escape, with every attempt only making the whole thing funnier. What About Bob did not begin with Frank Oz either. It began with Gary Marshall, who was attached early and spent weeks developing the project before the lead casting dragged out and the schedule kept slipping until he had to leave for another Touchstone film. That opened the door to a very different choice. Frank Oz was not the usual kind of comedy director. He had spent years learning how performance and tone work, first through puppetry and fantasy, then in live action, and by the late 1980s he had already made Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, a film that proved he knew how to build comedy out of contrast. What About Bob depends on exactly that. One man tight, one man loose, one trying to hold on to order, the other accidentally tearing it apart while trying to get better. Oz directed that structure with real control, believing the scene had to be clean enough for the funny part to emerge on its own. He stripped out the extra beats, removed the clutter, and increased the pressure between the two men at the center. The comedy got sharper, because everything around it got tighter. Bob Wiley feels so perfectly built for Bill Murray that it is easy to forget the role almost went somewhere else entirely. Robin Williams was the first big name in the mix, and it made sense. Williams had the speed, the mania, and the emotional range to play Bob like a full storm system. But he was already committed to the Fisher King, and once those schedules would not move, the movie had to find a different kind of chaos. Disney spent months chasing Murray, with Williams still hanging over the process as the obvious other version of the role. Murray stepped in at a strange in-between moment, coming off Quick Change, a personal project that had not connected, with Groundhog Day sitting just around the corner about to change how people saw him entirely. Once Murray came in, the role transformed. It stopped being about explosive mania and became something slower, stranger, and harder to shake. Murray did not attack the movie. He lingered in it, smiled through it, repeated himself through it until Bob stopped feeling like a burst of comic damage and started feeling like a man who was never, ever going to leave. Robin Williams might have played Bob like chaos arriving. Bill Murray played him like something that simply would not go away. But Bob only works if there is someone solid on the other side to destroy. Someone controlled, proud, and convinced he understands exactly how life is supposed to run. That man was Richard Dreyfuss, who came into the film needing a hit after an uneven decade that had cooled the Oscar glow from the late 1970s. Dr. Marvin was the right kind of role, because Marvin is built entirely on certainty. Successful, polished, respected, and absolutely convinced he is the smartest person in any room. Dreyfuss plays that control without forcing it, giving Marvin the kind of complete confidence where even the smallest disruption feels like a personal insult. The movie then added Julie Haggerty, and that addition mattered enormously. A film built on Murray's unpredictability and Dreyfuss' tightening frustration could have snapped in half without someone in the middle to soften the collision. Haggerty brought a screen presence that stayed open, calm, and slightly offbeat while everything around her spun out. She studies the scene rather than grabbing its center. Oz tested her directly with both actors, not because she needed to overpower either one, but because she had to keep the space between them playable. Once those three pieces locked into place, Bob finally had something solid enough to break. The script gave Bob a shape, and Murray kept refusing to stay inside it. Oz realized quickly that pinning Murray to fixed line readings was the wrong fight, so they made a deal. Stay in the scene, stay in the moment, but play. That made the production harder to control and gave the movie exactly what it needed. When Bob dives headfirst under the covers like a mole after being tucked into bed, that was not scripted. Julie Haggerty's reaction is not fully acted because she genuinely did not see it coming. The sailing scene had structure, but Murray kept pulling it wider, repeating, "I'm sailing," well past where the script had stopped. He reportedly started singing Brandy, "You're a fine girl," while strapped to the mast. In the mental institution sequences, cameras simply rolled while Murray interacted with extras and staff, not hitting marks but generating behavior the film could shape later. The dinner scenes were supposed to track Marvin's rising frustration, and they do, but Murray reshaped how they land entirely through repetitive sounds, exaggerated pleasure, and lingering just a beat too long in every moment. He was not advancing the plot. He was applying pressure to a real person, and that is what made Bob feel genuinely alive. The tension between Murray and Dreyfuss on screen felt real, because it was. Their history went back to 1978, when Dreyfuss hosted Saturday Night Live shortly after winning the Oscar for The Goodbye Girl. Murray was in his early sharp-edged SNL mode, sarcastic and unpredictable, while Dreyfuss arrived carrying himself like a newly crowned star. They rubbed each other the wrong way then, and time did not fix it. When What About Bob brought them back together, Dreyfuss built his scenes carefully and precisely while Murray treated every scene like open ground to improvise across. Frank Oz described it plainly. One actor was highly organized, the other almost completely unstructured, and both thought they were right. Murray later admitted he deliberately provoked Dreyfuss throughout production, believing it would sharpen the reactions on screen. Dreyfuss called the shoot a terribly unpleasant experience. Then it escalated. During one argument, Murray threw a glass ashtray in Dreyfuss' direction. As Dreyfuss described it, Murray came back from dinner, walked in, put his face nose to nose with him and screamed that everyone hated him and that he was merely tolerated, then hurled the ashtray and missed. Dreyfuss got up and left, later calling Murray an Irish bully, while also admitting the man made him laugh, even though he found him a despicable pig. Murray tried to downplay it, saying if he had actually aimed at him, he would not have missed. On set, nobody found that funny. Frank Oz was left containing two leads who did not trust each other, fed the exact tension the movie needed, and made the production increasingly difficult to survive. The ending audiences saw was not the original one. The film was never moving toward a single clean finish. Laura Ziskin and Alvin Sargent's original treatment aimed for a full-circle ending where Bob eventually becomes a therapist himself and turns the whole dynamic back on Marvin. Tom Schulman took it somewhere darker, ending with Marvin completely broken and institutionalized. Disney stepped in wanting something softer, a proper happy ending audiences could leave feeling good about. Schulman hated it. Oz hated it. But the movie was deep in production and the ending had become a survival problem rather than a writing one. Oz kept shooting, patching pages together at night, filming multiple versions of the ending, spending more time, more money, and absorbing more pressure. The test screenings delivered the worst possible result. Neither version worked. So the whole thing had to be rebuilt again, and the wedding ending that audiences know now arrived not because everyone loved it from the start, but because the film had burned through every darker and stranger version of itself before landing on the compromise it could live with. By the final stretch, all that pressure had converged on Frank Oz, and the question eating at him was whether the whole movie was simply broken. The tone kept shifting. The script kept changing. The actors kept pulling in opposite directions. The studio and the writers wanted entirely different things. Once that starts happening on a comedy, the floor can disappear fast. Oz later admitted the thought kept creeping in during the shoot, not that a scene was off or that something could be fixed later, but something far worse. What if all this tension and improvisation and rewriting are not creating energy, but just tearing the thing apart? He called the production a pressurized crucible. Crew members during the Virginia shoot heard what sounded like an animal dying in the woods and went to investigate. It was Oz alone, just screaming. During the explosion sequence near the end, after months of everything, he finally snapped in public, kicked over a garbage can, shouted, "Children, children," at Murray and Dreyfuss, then locked himself in his trailer and refused to come out or speak to anyone, including Dreyfuss. He still did not know whether all that pressure was making the movie sharper or slowly killing it. What about Bob? Opened in the summer of 1991 and pulled in more than $63 million against a budget of around $39 million. Not a blockbuster, but a clear hit built on a very strange engine. Critics responded strongly to Murray, recognizing that Bob was more than a nuisance. He was funny, needy, weirdly lovable, and completely impossible to dismiss. But the audience split along the same fault line the movie itself runs on. Some saw Roger Ebert's view, that Dreyfuss was playing an angry bore, and sided with Bob entirely. Others looked at the same scenes and saw a man committing walking boundary violations, inserting himself into another person's life, taking over an entire family, and somehow getting rewarded for all of it. From that angle, Marvin does not look unreasonable. He looks trapped. That divide never settled. As newer audiences found the film through the lens of modern thinking about therapy, mental health, and personal boundaries, the debate only sharpened. Some still see harmless comic exaggeration. Others see a nightmare wearing a comedy's clothes. The movie never tells you how to feel about Bob. It just lets him keep arriving and leaves everyone else to argue about the damage. The film worked, but the success fixed almost nothing behind the scenes. Murray and Dreyfuss never worked together again and barely crossed paths afterward. Dreyfuss and Oz did not stay close. Oz and Ziskin never collaborated again. Everyone came out of the production looking split. Dreyfuss was open about how miserable the experience had been while still admitting the film landed, that Murray made him laugh, and that years later he could even joke about being jealous of Murray's golf game. Murray framed the whole conflict as purposeful performance pressure, claiming the tension gave the movie a sharper edge. In 2020, Dreyfuss said he had forgiven Murray, not forgotten, not rewritten history, just stopped carrying it the same way. Oz sent Dreyfuss a letter years later apologizing for how the production unfolded and praising his performance. Dreyfuss never replied. The shoot broke trust. The movie held together anyway. That may be the strangest legacy of What About Bob? The production pushed people apart while the film itself refused to fall apart. Inside the movie, Siggy and Anna Marvin share a house, a summer, and a Bob-shaped disaster. After the cameras stopped, the similarity ended completely. Charlie Corsmo, who played Siggy, had momentum, recognition from Dick Tracy, and looked destined for a long Hollywood run. Instead, he walked away entirely, studied physics at MIT, went on to Yale Law School, became a professor at Case Western Reserve University, focusing on corporate law and finance, worked with the EPA, and received an appointment to a National Education Foundation board under President Obama. Catherine Irby, who played Anna, went the opposite direction. She stayed in the industry, kept building, and eventually became best known as Detective Alexandra Eames on Law and Order, Criminal Intent, a role she held for more than a decade. Same movie, same family, same starting point. One left and built a completely different life. The other stayed and became part of television history. What About Bob is a comedy that keeps changing depending on who you feel for. Bob is funny. Bob is exhausting. He is trying. He is impossible. Dr. Marvin is either a stuffed shirt ego case getting exactly what he deserves or a man watching his entire life get invaded while everyone around him laughs. The movie never settles the argument. It just lets Bob keep coming and leaves everybody else to figure out the damage on their own.